We're going to continue the lecture that I left off last time, kind of getting to the punchline for the origin of species, natural selection. I wanted to finish up my discussion of the origin of species, and then we're going to move on to population genetics, which is the mathematical treatment of genes and populations. All right, so it's sort of, in many ways, it's the mathematical heart of the field. Okay, now, are there any questions from the last lecture or the lecture previous to that? Okay, well, I'll get started. So I just put up here on the board the 4 chapters that I went through last time. I want to get to his 5th part of his argument. And here he's going to, what he tries to do here in the book is head off potential arguments against his theory, right? So he wants to pre-address them, so to speak. So any good argument, good rhetoric is to actually try to anticipate what some of the objections of your theory are going to be, and he does just that. One objection he addresses is transitional forms, or the lack thereof. Right? Now there's 2 different types of transitional forms he talks about, and I'm going to try to discuss both of them. One's really not a problem even from the theory point, the other is just an observation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a very small evolutionary tree here on the board. We're going to label the species of this tree. We'll label them species A and species B, very exciting names. But you can think of this human, chimp, or any 2 species that you're interested in. Okay? And the idea here is that they share a common ancestor at this point here. This is the common ancestor of these 2 species, which occurred sometime in the past. Now, there's 2 different types of transitional forms. The first one I'm just going to dismiss and talk about very quickly. There are some people that believe that the theory predicts that every single transitional form that was alive between 2 species should be present today. Okay? That is not part of the theory. The theory doesn't predict that's the case at all. Now, when you think about back in time, here's one way of thinking about a population. We'll be talking about it more in a bit. But think about a population as just being a group of individuals that randomly mate with one another. And this might be the population of individuals at one point in time. And here they are at some later point in time. I'm trying to do perspective here. It's not great. Okay? The point is that you can actually trace these individuals' history back to the previous population. But it doesn't mean that this population here, by necessity, leaves a descendant today. It only has to leave descendants in the next generation. So the reason you don't see transitional forms populating a large number of smooth gradation between any 2 species that are alive today is because those transitional forms didn't leave descendants today. They just evolved into the next generation. Okay? So this is the type of transitional form that is not a problem at all. It's not even predicted by the theory. But there is another type of transitional form that is predicted by the theory. All right? The prediction is that in the past you did have populations alive in the past that eventually evolved into the species we see today. Right? There is a common ancestor between these 2 species that was alive in the past, and that you can pick any point along this branch, this lineage leading to species A, say, and the prediction is that there was a population at some point in some place, geographic place on Earth at some time right there, and similarly here. Okay? Now the only possible ways that these species, these ancestral populations, can be represented today is as fossils. Okay? That's the only possible way we can actually see them, or evidence of them, is fossils. And so then the question becomes, well, the prediction is that we should see, if we could look into the fossil record, we should see all the intermediate forms. Okay? So you can imagine fossils at any point in time here. Now, why do we not have that type of record? That would be wonderful if we had it, but we don't have it. It turns out that the fossilization process is a chancy one. Okay, so there's 2 things. I mean, if you want to become a fossil someday, we'll talk about this, but there's a subdiscipline within the field of paleontology. I know you guys are thinking, well, paleontology seems like a pretty specialized discipline already. You're telling me there's a subdiscipline within paleontology. It turns out there is. There are people that study the fossilization process. They're called taphonomists. I always thought it was kind of the most gruesome part of the field, frankly, because often they do these experiments where they leave carcasses out and see what happens to them, right? But if you want to become a fossil, these people, by the way, study all the things that occur between the death of an organism and its placement in a museum drawer, right? That's one way to think about it. But if you want to become a fossil, it's good to die in a place that is near water, where you're going to be covered up by sediment very rapidly, where you won't be eroded away quickly. These are all things that are necessary to become a fossil. And it turns out it's a chancy process. And not only that, in order to find a fossil in a museum drawer, you have to have rocks exposed on the Earth's surface that are of the right age. Okay? And it's possible that there's no rocks on the Earth's surface that are of the correct age to even have the fossil preserved there that you discover. So his argument is the correct one, is that the fossil, the reason why we don't see all these transitional forms is because the fossil record is imperfect. Okay? Now, this is describing the fossil record as he understood it in his time, which was that, we actually knew a lot less about the fossil record then than we do now. That said, we have discovered many, many transitional forms over the last 150 years, 200 years even. And it's typically the case that, well, they could be direct ancestors for all we know. It's very difficult to determine whether a fossil that you find in a museum drawer is actually a direct ancestor to some species or a close cousin, so to speak. Right? It's hard to know if that's the case. But we do have lots of examples of fossil organisms that are mosaics between different types of species, so that they have characteristics of 2 different groups. So for instance, if we replace the names A and B by something more sensible, let's say crocodiles and birds. If you look at vertebrates, crocodiles and birds are each other's closest relatives. Well, there's lots of fossils of crocodiles, and especially along the lineage leading to birds, there's lots of fossils. We call many of these actually, we call by the name dinosaurs. All right, S-A-U-R-S. And some of these dinosaurs are very similar to birds. They actually have many of the characteristics of modern birds. There are things that you look at them and you'd say that's a dinosaur, but it's a dinosaur with feathers, for example, or it's a dinosaur that has hollow bones, because hollow bones are something that characterized modern birds, but they didn't evolve for flight, evidently. You would think any sensible person would say, if I was making a bird, I'd make their bones hollow because they're lighter that way. Well, it turns out hollow bones did not evolve for flight, evidently, because things like Tyrannosaurus rex have them. Right, so for whatever reason, hollow bones, as an example, evolved. It wasn't for flight, but for whatever reasons feathers evolved, it was not for flight, because organisms that clearly did not have feathers, clearly could not have flown, have feathers. Right? So sometimes you'll see these characteristics that you think diagnose a particular group of living organisms. Say, okay, birds, hollow bones, feathers, they fly, big sternum, and all sorts of characteristics that are associated with flight. A lot of those characteristics did not evolve uniquely all at once for birds. They came in for other reasons. So anyways, that's one point out we have many transitional forms now in the fossil record. I think it's always tempting for people that have problems with the theory to say, okay, well, you show me that one, but what about the transitional form between this group and that group? Or you can show them something like this. All right, here's a transitional form. There. They say, fine, show me another one. So maybe later on you're lucky enough you find one here and say, well, what about that gap there? Well, it's not fair to keep asking for more and more detailed information. It's nice to have that type of information, but it may just not be available. Now, I want to tell you one other thing about transitional forms that you may not have thought about. I think almost everybody thinks about transitional forms in the sense that I just described them. That is to say, critters that have characteristics, mosaic of characteristics, some from one group and some from another, right? That's what most people think of as a transitional form. But transitional forms also occur at a specific time and sometimes place, okay? And that's also predicted by the theory. So as an example, we'll have a guest speaker for the very last lecture who will speak about human evolution. But if you were to erase crocs and birds and put humans and chimps as the labels instead, humans and chimps are each other's closest relatives. Humans are more closely related to chimpanzees than they are to gorillas, for instance. It turns out, well, if you're a chimp, you're out of luck. There's just one fossil bone, I think it's like a humerus or something, on the entire lineage leading to chimps, probably because their ancestors lived in forests, and forests aren't conducive to fossilization. But humans have lots and lots of, a fairly rich fossil record by comparison, okay? Now, these fossils have the right form. As I say, they're things that clearly walk bipedally. They have brains that are often intermediate in size between what we think the common ancestor had and what we have now. But they also occur at a specific time. So molecular evidence says that this divergence, the common ancestor for humans and chimps lived somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago. That's our best estimate. All right? These transitional forms, it's important to note that not only do they have the right form, morphology, but they're at the right time. They're not 100 million years old. They're not 50 million years old. They're not a billion years old. I have a colleague up on the 5th floor by the name of Tim White, probably the most famous paleoanthropologist alive today. He found a species that he called Ardipithecus, or Ardi, that's about 4.4 million years old, right? Not only does it have the right form, the form that would be predicted, but it's at the right time. 4.4 million years is just about right. And it's consistent with what independent evidence says should be the common ancestor for humans and chimps. So that's another thing to think about with transitional forms. If they have the right form, there's the right, that is to say, do they look transitional between two groups? And are they at the right time? And finally, there's the place they live. If you look at humans and chimps, and let's look at gorilla as closely related to humans and chimps. Chimps live in Africa, gorillas live in Africa. Humans live all over the world, but originated in Africa, at least modern humans did. Where do we find Ardi? Well, we don't find Ardi in Antarctica. We don't find Ardi in North America. We don't find Ardi in Asia. We find Ardi in Africa, which is the right place. So you have to realize that the transitional forms can be, there's more to a transitional form than just its morphology. They also have it, they're also placed in time and space. And the theory makes predictions about those things too. Okay? So these transitional forms are much more compelling than just looking at their morphology. All right, I spent more time on that than I wanted to, but it's actually an important point. All right, so he headed off the problem with transitional forms and then large transitions, or organs of extreme perfection, also concern Darwin a lot. Okay? And why is that? You look at an eye, like a human eye, and it's an organ that has lots of moving parts, all of which have some specific function. Right? You think about it, there's muscles that turn the eye, you can focus, there's light-sensitive cells that coat the back of this cup that, it's just a very sophisticated organ, right? And the prediction is that organs such as this had to have evolved through intermediate simpler states. And not only that, each of these simpler states had to be better than the form that went before. Right? You can't have a transitional or intermediate state between I and not have an I that's worse, right? And so you have to have some sort of plausible sequence of events that, or states that could lead from no I to I, each of which is better than the former. Now, eyes, as it turns out, aren't really, it's remarkable to say this, but eyes aren't a problem. It looks like eyes and sophisticated eyes have evolved independently maybe as many as a dozen or more times, okay? And just to give you an example of some of the transitional forms, let's see here. How do we get, oh, good, thank you. Well, you saw that one last lesson. So here are some examples of eyes that you can find in mollusks. Mollusks are things like clams and snails and squid and things like that, octopus. And in mollusks, you can find all these different sorts of eyes. And they actually illustrate some of the transitional forms we think actually occurs in the development of a complex eye. So you have eyes that are as simple as this, where you just have a patch of light-sensitive cells on the surface, right? That you can imagine what good is this? Well, it's better than not having light-sensitive patches if it's just knowing that something's above you or not, right? Maybe if you're a climate, you know just enough to climb up, so to speak. Here, putting the cells in a cup is useful because you can tell the direction from which the light's traveling. Okay? Just by making a small cup and putting light-sensitive cells at the bottom of that, you can actually tell the direction from which the light's coming. Some of you probably made pinhole cameras, and you can actually get a focused image. You can make I've seen online people can make pinhole digital cameras. If you really want to ruin your camera in some way, you can make a pinhole camera out of your digital camera and get a fairly decent image out of it, right, which is pretty cool. But by just making that the hole to which light travels small enough, you can actually get a fairly focused image. And then from there, you can have some sort of lens that actually allows you to focus the image. Okay? But the point here is that even within living organisms, you can see a wide variety of eyes just within mollusks. And it looks like we've had independent evolution of eyes several times at least. And the reason we think that is because the species that, so we have evidence from the evolutionary trees that suggests that they evolved independently more than once, and also the clues from the morphology of the eyes, how they're actually structured. So octopus and vertebrates have similar looking eyes superficially in terms of how sophisticated they are, but there's clues in how those eyes are put together that tells you they probably had independent origins, or almost certainly had independent origins. Okay? Now, this is an example of a transitional form that's easy, I think fairly easy to explain. There are transitional forms that are more difficult to explain. So, like I said, I think we can make plausible arguments for why each one of these is better than the previous one in terms of its function, right? But how about wings? Now, if I'm flying an airliner, I want the wings of the aircraft to be a certain length. If you shorten them by 1/2, I would be concerned, right? Because wings are one of those things where they have to be long enough to fly, and if they're any shorter than a certain critical length, you don't fly. Right? So you have a situation where the intermediate forms are, you don't fly, 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 you fly. Right? It's not something gradual where every intermediate state is slightly better. Is that clear? So some transitional forms are more difficult to explain. And the argument that people usually put together, and it's testable, is that the characteristics, say wings in birds or bats or insects or pterosaurs, they must have evolved for some other purpose, or they could have evolved for some other purpose. And that appears to be the case where when we have a rich enough fossil record, it's pretty clear that they probably did. Some of the dinosaurs, for instance, that are very closely related to birds, have very long forearms. We don't know exactly why, but whatever reason they have long forearms was for some other adaptive purpose, not flying because they clearly couldn't fly. And these are the dinosaurs that happen to have feathers as well. All right, so those are some of the problems he tried to head off. I want to point out the sixth thing that Darwin talked about. I'm going to know what to turn. I'm actually coming up with these headings as we speak. So I'm going to say kind of what you get for free. What other things you can explain with this theory that were difficult to explain before. Okay, that's a mark of a good theory. So here's Darwin saying he has this mechanism of natural selection that can explain adaptation, right? So it's the only mechanism that we know of that can do that. And here's and not only that, I can explain a lot of unrelated observations, right? And here's some of them. I already told you that that he can explain the fossil record. So the fossil record, as it was known at the time, and certainly as it's known now, is consistent with this theory. The fossils are predicted in terms of the intermediate forms we find, and the timing of those intermediate forms are all consistent with the theory. Okay, so that's one thing he can explain. The fossil record is now explainable as a whole. Okay? I'm not going to go into any more detail about that. He's also able to explain the geographic distribution of species. So that is an area of biology called biogeography. So he's able to explain biogeography. And the observation is this. It's an old observation. The observation is that you have species that seem very similar living in the same area. right? That's to say, when you go, when you think about marsupials, what continent do you think of? Australia, right? And so why do we have so many marsupials in Australia? Well, Darwin's explanation would be simple. The ancestors of these guys lived in Australia, right? That's why you have so many marsupials in Australia. So ancestry, common ancestry, can explain why you have similar species in the same area. And an example of this would be New and Old World monkeys. Okay, so I don't know what that is. Good, it's gone. But New World monkeys live in the New World, North and South America, mostly South America. Old World monkeys live in Africa, Europe, Asia. Okay? And you have certain characteristics that diagnose Old and New World monkeys. So for instance, Old World monkeys have 2 premolars, right? They have a hook-shaped nose. Those would be characteristics that all these Old World monkeys share. We actually are descended from Old World monkeys. New World monkeys, the ones that live in, say, South America, have 3 premolars and have a flat nose, okay? They're called platyrrhines because of the shape of their nose. The Darwinian explanation for why you have New World and Old World monkeys, that is to say monkeys that seem close related living in a similar area, is because the ancestors of those species lived in, say, South America or the Old World, right? Once again, maybe it's an obvious explanation or you know, maybe this is too obvious to you, but it's an observation that's an important one. It's something that's widespread, and it's simple to explain with this theory. So that's why it's important. As an aside, Darwin was also really interested in oceanic islands. That is to say, volcanic oceanic islands. That is to say, islands that formed relatively recently, such as the Galapagos, which are just a few, maybe 5, 10 million years old. I don't remember the exact date, but they're about that old. I think they're about 5 to 7 million years old. And the reason why he's interested in these islands is because they really show the footprint of history, is how I might characterize it. That is to say, when a volcanic island first emerges from underwater, it's rock, right? It's not a very hospitable place. But over time, these rocks, oceanic rocks, so to speak, become colonized. And the colonization is a chancy business. Which species actually make it to these islands and colonize? And so he points out that there are some interesting observations about what types of plants and animals are found and are not found on islands. So he points out that insects and birds, you find a lot of those on islands. And I think we can all probably envision why that's the case. They fly there, right? They get blown in by a storm, but birds and insects, it turns out they can fly. So getting to an oceanic island isn't an insurmountable problem, right? That said, when we do see these birds, since I told you about the finches on the Galapagos Islands, it could be the case that it's still a rare event to get a gravid female, say, that lands on the island, has some babies, and the population takes off. So you actually see the mark of history on these islands as well. As I say, we have a lot of different species of finch on the Galapagos Islands because you had a chance event a long time ago where you had one species of finch become colonize the island, and then it radiated. It speciated into many different species on that island over the last 5 to 10 million years. So those are some species you find. Reptiles you find. I mean, you're aware of the Galapagos tortoises, those giant tortoises. One thing that's interesting about the finches on the Galapagos Island and the tortoises is you can ask, where is the closest relatives of the finches and the tortoises? Well, you know where they live. They live in South America. And not only that, the closest relatives live on the west coast of South America, right? So if you want to find the closest related tortoise to the Galapagos Island tortoises, it's found in South America. I can't remember if that was like a chocolate tortoise or something like that. I could look it up. So that's an interesting observation. But reptiles especially are fairly hardy in terms of how long they can go without food and water. So if anybody has reptiles and snakes, you can feed them once. A snake gets fed every week or 2, right? And tortoises especially are hardy. The reason why why some of these species of tortoise on the Galapagos Islands are extinct or nearly extinct is because the sailors used to come there, and if you realize what the diet of the sailor in the 1800s was, it was pretty bad, right? Salted pork, worm-infested bread, that type of thing. So what they would do is they grab these tortoises, turn them upside down, put them on the decks of their ships, and the tortoises would live for months, and occasionally they slaughter one and eat it, turtle soup, right? So they have fresh meat for a long voyage, and that's one of the reasons why there's so few tortoises, at least why many of them almost went extinct in the Galapagos, is because they were hardy. But it also means that you can drop a tortoise into the ocean, and it can live for a few weeks, just floating around, right? And in cases of some reptiles like lizards and whatnot, they've actually, after big storms in the tropics, you have often large mats of tropical forest or mangrove forest are torn away from the coast and go floating out to sea. So you go out there, and sometimes you'll find these mats floating around today. And if you were to go jump onto one of these rafts, you often find lizards and things crawling around. So it's not hard to imagine that some of these rafts could have struck the Galapagos Island, and you'd have, just by chance, certain species of, say, iguana colonizing the island. But anyway, so he was fascinated by the types of species found on these islands, the types that are found and the types that are not found. You don't find freshwater fish on these oceanic islands. They don't fish that are freshwater don't tolerate saltwater. Amphibians are very sensitive to saltwater. They are not found on these oceanic islands. So the point being here that these oceanic islands really show a strong imprint of chance events in history, right? Because they're recent, and the distribution, the types of species you find on them are kind of strange often. All right, so another thing that Darwin could explain is homology. So homologous characters are characters that are similar from one species to another, structures that are similar from one species to another. And the explanation for why we have homologous characters is because these species share a common ancestor. So for instance, going back to the slide, please. This is almost a trite example. I'll show you some more profound ones. But vertebrates have this pattern of one arm. If you look at the forelimb, one bone followed by 2 bones followed by a bunch of bones, right? That is the pattern we have. I mean, all these bones have names. No doubt a large number of you are going to have to memorize all those names. But that's the point. One bone followed by 2 bones followed by a bunch of little bones, right? Vertebrates share that pattern. So you find in a mole, for example, a pattern where in the forelimb you have 1 bone followed by 2 bones followed by a bunch of little bones. Horses, you say, well, look, you have 1 bone followed by 2 bones, which are fused. You can even see that developmentally, followed by 1 bone. The ancestors, we look in the rock record, the fossil record, you find that you actually find ancestors of horses that have more than 1 bone. Dolphins, 1 bone, 2 bone, followed by a bunch of bones, and so forth. That's a common pattern. These are examples of homologous structures. And the reason why we have homologous structures, according to Darwin's theory, is that these species happen to share a common ancestor that had a pattern in the forelimb of 1 bone followed by 2 bones followed by a bunch of little bones. We just inherited those characteristics. Okay? Now, homology can be of all sorts of different types. And here's another example of a homologous character, which is worth talking about. These are called pseudogenes. So pseudogenes are